Yep, for sure.
Okay, looks like we're good.
Great. We'll just wait another 2 minutes or so, just get some people in here. Oh, there's Christina. All right. Ready to get started, Barney?
Yeah, ready to go.
Awesome, great. So yeah, so we saw some people trickle in, so we'll see that as well here. And yeah, as a reminder for everybody who's joining, first of all, thanks for coming. And of course, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask them in the chat here. And you know, we'll get to them as part of this. You can actually just ask them directly. So yeah, so I guess, you know, first of all, big thank you, Barney, for taking the time to chat with us, and of course for Vega being a part of ETHOnline. I know it's the first time we've got the opportunity to work with your team and with your company, and you know, we're really excited to have you supporting the event, and excited to see what people end up building on top of Vega. And of course, you know, it's exciting timing for Vega in general, which I'm sure we'll get into. So yeah, so I mean, just kind of all around, you know, very happy to have you on board and very excited to be working with you.
Awesome, thanks, Jacob. Yeah, really excited to be here. Super excited to see what people build with Vega. As you kind of mentioned, it's a really exciting time when we're opening up a lot of what we've built over the last couple of years, and it's really cool to see people doing all kinds of fun stuff with it. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. So yeah, we're going to touch on Vega for everybody who's not familiar as well in the chat. But I think, you know, for these, you know, I'd like to kind of start a little bit earlier, back before Vega and before everything there. So, you know, I kind of would love to kind of hear a little bit more about, you know, early career and sort of, I know you were involved in capital markets and in markets in general. You know, love to kind of just get a sense for, you know, what basis did you kind of have as a knowledge before you came and started working on Vega? Just get a little sense of sort of what you were working on before.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I was you know, university. I was a computer scientist. Studied computer science and decided I didn't really want to be a programmer. You know, sort of full time. So I went into sort of management and technology consulting, and very quickly found kind of a space. At that time in London, the scene was nowhere near as vibrant as it is now. So the obvious place for kind of cool technical problems was trading account markets. It still is. So, you know, in many cases, there's still a lot of that there now. So I went and worked in that space and started working on kind of trading systems design. We spent a bunch of time, you know, consulting for people like major exchanges and investment banks, and you know, meeting traders and incredibly smart technologists and quants, so people who were sort of, you know, PhD and above mathematicians designing algorithms, and you know, had a huge amount of fun just designing stuff and doing cool stuff with trading. But you always kind of got that feeling that it was this kind of special rarefied world that was really only open to a very small number of people. Like, kind of compare that with DeFi, where everyone can create something, and whether it's a good idea or not, it's going to happen, and you kind of get to find out, and that's really fun. But that wasn't really there. It was kind of a, you know, the sort of in-group. And if you were in the in-group, you got to do all this kind of cool stuff and have access to these products and systems and learn these, all this maths and all this stuff. But the rest of the world was just oblivious. And that was kind of one of the things that got me sort of into the blockchain scene. I was always kind of interested in privacy and cryptography, and so that was interesting. And I started doing some Bitcoin mining and getting involved in the Ethereum pre-sale in a very small way, but enough to get me interested in building stuff with it. And kind of all snowballed from there once I realized that this kind of closed off ecosystem that existed didn't have to be that way. And that really is what brought me here.
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess I normally ask people for kind of what their aha moment was with blockchain or crypto, right? Where, it really just kind of clicked and became that mind worm that it is for really so many of us. Would you say sort of that was was it related to that, or was there any specific moment in time or thought that kind of sticks out to you that, really you decided, this was the thing that I'm going to start thinking about quite heavily?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think when I first started using Bitcoin, it was interesting and cool, a bit like, kind of end-to-end encryption is cool. I thought it was really important technology, but maybe, not something that I was going to get involved in. I think it was, Ethereum coming along, and obviously, I guess, with ETHOnline being the thing that's it's kind of serendipitous that that's the case. It was Ethereum coming along and me kind of sort of thinking, actually, I can start writing code, and that means I can do all this stuff. That was the moment that blew my mind. And you started reading articles and books, and it was like, this is not just a way of moving money. This is a way of doing all of the things that a server on the internet can do without having to trust anyone to run a server on the internet. And that was super cool, because that was just an entirely different thing. That was this kind of, this kind of way of controlling anarchy. It's kind of like you can have an anarchy, everyone can have their thing. There's no central government, but yet you're all able to agree and get organized. And that's like super cool, because I always thought, anarchy is a pretty attractive philosophy, but it doesn't scale. So this is like scalable anarchy. And it sounded pretty exciting. And it was kind of that concept that got me excited to dig deeper and start developing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I've never heard of it described that way, but I mean, that totally is accurate. I mean, it's a trustless system with, in a way, like it has kind of a set of axioms that sort of is its base layer, but really kind of anywhere outside of that, you can and operate in any really which way you like, right?
Yeah, and people don't realize, how much that's true. Like, even with Bitcoin, there will only be 21 million Bitcoin, unless all the people running Bitcoin nodes decide to change that. And that's probably pretty unlikely, because a lot of the attraction of Bitcoin is that there'll only be 21 million. So they tend not to make that kind of decision because it would be self-defeating. But the fact is, no one in the world is going to force them not to make that decision. And that's super cool.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think it's, it's definitely an incredibly unique experience. And I guess in a way, it almost kind of seems to fuse a little bit of your interest, right, of your past degree in computer science and, of course, markets and everything like that. So, particularly interesting for me for, I think, the same reason.
Then the next feeling after the excitement was crushing disappointment, because we've seen it written before on Twitter. Ethereum has all the power of a pocket calculator, and if you've been working with quants on, these are the kind of these organizations would have software running on every desktop machine of their 28,000 employees that harvest CPU cycles. The second they log out and go home, that machine just loans itself to part of their computing grid to do crazy hard maths. So you're used to that, and then you're trying to build things on Ethereum, and you suddenly go, whoa, there's not actually that much I can do. And that creates a lot of creativity, but it also creates a lot of restrictions. So they then realized they couldn't do what I wanted to do, and stopped doing a lot of the development-y stuff for a good while, until we started Vega at the beginning of 2018, after meeting some of the researchers at UCL who went on to found Chainspace, who are great friends of ours, and chatting to them about some of the latest stuff and the proof of stake, and talking about what it is I was trying to do, that I was so sad about not being able to do on Ethereum. And that really, those conversations and meeting my co-founder Ramsey and him introducing me to those people and others, that was really the start of getting really seriously involved, when I suddenly realized that people were coming up with solutions to those problems, and the whole thing had sort of moved on.
Right. Yeah, totally. I mean, maybe a great opportunity to kind of talk about, I guess the early idea of what Vega was and sort of, what it has become over the last couple of years as you've been working on it. Would love to kind of delve into maybe the motivations behind why you thought this was kind of the right time to start working on this problem, and why it's the right problem to work on. And then, yeah, maybe just kind of a quick walkthrough on sort of, Vega in general and what sets it apart and what it's actually trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the motivations, I guess it all comes out of that kind of, why is, well, it comes out of the why, but also looking at the internet and seeing what happened, in terms of the explosion of creativity and openness to everyone on Earth when information stopped kind of going through a small number of channels and became open to everyone to contribute. And we have some teething problems with that, certainly, but in general, I think it's good and it's great to open things up. And I think of Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these things as kind of the same, but for value and finance, in that we're making it much easier to innovate, much cheaper to innovate, and opening the system up, ripping it apart at the seams and letting everyone participate. And so that was the starting point for me. It was kind of like, okay, so let's say I've got these Bitcoins or these DAI or these USDT or whatever they are, and I want to start using them for stuff. And what I realized from my experience in the markets was that finance is very little about bits of finance or about money. Most of finance is about agreements and derivatives and special purpose vehicles and instruments and products and insurance and all these other things. And so if you decentralize money, but then didn't decentralize anything else, it wasn't necessarily going to be super helpful. And if you kind of had this idea of a world where finance is as programmable and as open as the internet, you kind of have to decentralize the whole system. And the bit of the system that I knew the best and that also was probably the hardest to decentralize and was the most resistant to it because of all its properties of sort of things like margin trading and the complexity of risk models and all of that was derivatives. And so I kind of sort of thought, well, it was also the one no one was trying, probably because it was harder. And so I kind of thought, well, what would it take to do this? And I basically decided it was impossible. I sort of looked through and thought, well, we need to be able to run these super sophisticated risk models. We need to be able to have a much fairer blockchain than the kind of minor extractable value sort of situation you have with Ethereum. We need to be able to do all these other things. And I concluded it wasn't really possible. And then my co-founder came along and introduced me to these researchers and these other people. And we kind of started pulling together this team and talking about it with all these people and realized that one by one, we knocked down all these hurdles and it was going to be possible. And so that really was, it was what got me thinking about it. But I think it's the most exciting problem because it's one that you can't sort of, sometimes with problems you have this, you can't get there from here type of problem, which is kind of like, you can start off with something that's halfway there, but that thing might actually not be anywhere near the direction of where you need to be to do it. It's like kind of if you designed the aeroplane and you wanted to go to the moon, the aeroplane is never going to get there no matter how much better you make it. You've got to design a rocket. Right. And I kind of felt like that's where we were with crypto. You could have DEXs, you could have kind of on-chain atomic swaps and things like that, and you could make all that stuff happen, but none of that was going to get us efficient, good quality derivatives that would let us fully decentralize the financial system. And so we saw this opportunity to take what I'd learned, and Tamlin on the team, and David, Tamlin's an ex-derivatives trader. She's done it for like 15 plus years, and she makes sure that we're building things that traders will really use. And David's an ex-front office quant, and he understands the risk side. And we had the ability to design something by throwing away some of those starting points and starting again with that set of requirements and needs. We had the opportunity to design something that could get there and that would sort of decentralize this critical part of the infrastructure. And that was really why I thought it was a crucial problem to work on, but also why I thought that in this space full of super smart people, we had a slightly unique team and take on it that meant that we had a chance of success.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, to me, a bit of a tall order, right? To be able to replicate sort of, the entire sort of centralized finance or traditional finance kind of derivative system, and model it in such a way with, smart contracts and, in a way that is also, offers kind of the same guarantees on performance or, what have you as traditional markets, right? Like, I mean, you need to be able to have a compelling enough product to have people move over to it. So I guess like what I'm leading at here is sort of, this seems like a very large problem. And typically the way you do large problems is you solve small pieces and then work your way up to this kind of larger solution. So I guess sort of maybe just kind of what were some of those earlier small pieces you worked on? And in general, like what was your approach to solving those kind of otherwise quite large and outlandish problem? Like how did you actually approach coming to a solution?
I guess there's a couple of advantages. The first thing is to remember that a lot of the small pieces have been solved, but like I mentioned, there was this kind of small club of people who worked on finance. And, there are a few people now in the crypto space, actually, as it matures, who've done the same and who've seen these things before and who get some of this. But, it's certainly 2 or 3 years ago, there were even fewer of them. So a lot of these problems have actually been solved. They've been investigated, the research has been done, the PhDs have been written. So, part of the first thing we did was take all that kind of knowledge and experience and work out what was already solved just somewhere else. And then we kind of looked at the gaps and said, well, what is it we've got to do for, afresh? And then you go look on our website at vega.xyz, and the papers section, you'll see a bunch of research that we've done where we had exactly that problem. We're kind of like, well, exchanges actually do have a useful role. Even though we want to get rid of them, they bring in liquidity. They decide what products and markets to create. They deal with fraud. So how do we get rid of that? So we had to work out how to incentivize liquidity provision and market operation in a way that both encourages people to provide liquidity, but also encourages them to create liquidity. Because one problem a lot of decentralized exchanges have is that if there's a big market, you have an incentive to make liquidity. But if there's a small market, why are you going to bother being the one creating it? You kind of rely on the project team to create this thing because there's no real incentive to be there first. So we wanted to deal with that, make it like equity, like founding a company, so that you actually, if you create something valuable, and it gets to your point about sort of entrepreneurship, if you create something of value, you should get rewarded because you're the one who created it and took the risk. And so we did the research on that, and then on how to actually measure and price liquidity on an order book, because on AMM, every dollar is worth $1. On an order book, an order that's worth $1 that's right, an aggressive price is worth a lot more than an order that's just sat out at a price that's never going to trade. So we had to solve that problem. And then the other big problem for me was fairness. Like, you read the stuff about the Ethereum and the dark forest blog post, and you see MEV and front running attacks, and you kind of think, well, there's 2 problems with that. The first one is, why will anyone move from the traditional products to one where they know that people can get away with it and just jump in front of them? And the second one is the fee problem. If I can pay a higher fee to get in front of you and steal a bunch of money from your trade, I'm going to. Well, I might not, but someone's going to. And if that keeps happening, you're just going to have an arms race where the block gets filled up with higher and higher fees. And we've seen this happen on occasions before, until no one who's in the block really was the people who were trying to trade. They're all these bots trying to get one ahead of the other to take that advantage. And so that mechanic pushes the fees up. And so we really needed to solve that problem to actually say, just like in sort of other markets, there's got to be a different definition of what it means to have fair access to a blockchain. And we solved that. And Klaus's research called Wendy, the good little fairness widget, provides a consensus layer protocol for giving fair access. So they're probably 2 of the biggest ones, and there's a bunch of other things we've got through on the way, and lots of little things we've had to solve to make it all sort of pull together and work. And thankfully, it did all pull together and work, and it sort of does work now and is in testnet. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So I mean, like, yeah, would love to talk about the testnet as well. I mean, obviously, it's like the testnet is in a way the completion of kind of this epic process of like putting all these things together, and then actually having something that's available for people to use and to play around with. I wonder sort of, I guess what is sort of the goal for Vega behind the testnet? Like, what would you like to see happen with it for it to be deemed in a way comfortable enough to move to a mainnet situation? And then also like what are some of the cool things you have seen so far it being utilized for?
Yeah. So yeah, it's the completion, but in many ways it's the start. And I guess what I mean is, if you're building something quite simple, you might spend 3 or 4 weeks pulling something together and throw it over the first thing you do. You may not even have to raise any money. You write some code, you throw it out there, you got an app on the App Store or whatever, and you get feedback. And unfortunately, in this domain, when you're talking about blockchains and derivatives and building your own layer 1 and all of this stuff, it's not 3 or 4 weeks, it's kind of 1 or 2 years. And so, in one way, it's kind of the start. We've managed to convince enough people to back the vision that we've managed to build a version, and we can throw the first one over the fence and see what works and what doesn't. And that's really exciting. So the first thing is, it's its own goal, in that having thrown it over the fence and having people use it is super exciting. And that's really the start of the journey for Vega as a protocol that exists, that people can play with and touch and use. So that's one way to think about it. And then I guess the other one, you're turning it into a mainnet. The biggest problem is expectations. Like, if you're a reasonably well-funded project that puts something out that offers someone this incredible capability they might not have had before, you have to be very careful about not overselling how tested it is. And so, we can do a bunch of testing in testnet, and we're responding to feedback and trying to make sure that it's ready to go into mainnet as far as we can tell, and there's nothing glaring left. But one of the most important things is to go into mainnet in a very in a very honest way, and kind of go, this is its first time in mainnet, and the people running the validators, all these things that are completely new, and sort of set it up in a way that it's out there, and it's an experiment, and it's an experiment with the community. Everyone can use it. We can all test it together. We can all feedback and iterate, and then actually, as a community, we'll get to a point where we decide we're trusted enough to kind of go for the big guns and allow anyone to trade anything in a really big way. So I think, for me, it's about building that community and that trust, and it's about being the very beginning of proving to everyone here and everyone on this call and everyone in the team and everywhere else that Vega is worthwhile and trustworthy, and that you can put serious value on it. And I remember when Ethereum launched, there were similar things. Nothing was ever going to be like Bitcoin, and everything else was a scam. And some people still believe that, but
right.
Ethereum, I think, has kind of proven itself, at least being you trust it with a reasonably serious amount of money now. And I think Vega's got a little way to go before it can prove that. And so it's the start of that journey, and just getting there piece by piece, I think, is the real goal for starting with the testnet. And the first mainnet will be kind of a Wild West net, where a similar sort of thing will be going on, where we're actually kind of saying, hey, this is the crazy version, but come test it with us and help us get there.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we kind of are touching on it with this, but I'd love to maybe explore a little bit about how, I guess, you and how Vega thinks about risk in association to this, right? I mean, it's a big topic, especially in DeFi, around making sure that contracts are sufficiently audited. People are throwing tons of money into contracts that aren't audited at all, which is quite insane, but so it goes. But kind of, I think risk here applies to Vega in two different ways, and would like to maybe explore both. One is obviously the protocol level risk, which I think we've just sort of discussed a little bit aside. And then the other would be, just inherent risk around derivatives, right? Like derivatives are kind of a different risk profile than most people are used to trading. You talked about opening this up to the masses, right? And having, kind of everyone be able to access these types of products. So maybe I think the first part I would love to kind of talk about what Vega is doing on the protocol risk side of things. And then the other side, we'd love to kind of think about kind of the overall philosophy about education and making sure that people are taking on personal risk that is comfortable for them.
Yeah, so the protocol risk is, it's a really important topic, and there is almost no such thing as too much you can do. When we get to the right point, there will be audits, there will certainly be bug bounties and community stuff, there will be open source reviews of the code. There will be our internal testing, and we'll be very transparent about what we've tested internally and what we see in the results and how we're doing that. There'll be like modeling and scenario testing, and we'll bring in sort of externals to do that as well as internal. We'll do just a huge amount of that kind of testing. The other thing we can do is we can try and design to reduce risk. So we can design safeguards. So we can basically say, well, if this part fails, then this part will catch it. There's a governance action here that can solve this problem. So you can kind of make things multi-layered. And that's helpful as well. And then another thing you can do is you can design things to be kind of robust over time or less robust. And a good example is if every derivatives market is either an order book or an AMM, then ideally maybe you just have one bit of order book code and one AMM code. And now every market that uses an order book is further testing for that order book. Whereas a lot of the time what you see in kind of some of the other DeFi stuff is everything is reusing everything else, and everything is different, and everything is a fork. So if there are 50 AMMs and 50 order books, we've got to review 50 sets of that code, and every one of them has been tested 1/50th as much in reality.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things is designed for reuse within the Vega system in a very radical way, so that actually every market is testing the same code and you get a lot more coverage a lot more quickly. And so that's another big part of it. And I think ultimately you'll only get there by sort of proving it eventually, maybe even with sort of formal proofs for some parts of the system. But realistically, a lot of it is going to take time. It's going to take people's belief. It's going to take documentation and just involving the community and taking them on that journey and being honest about the risks that are there. And I think that's one part. And then I guess the other part is this is the sort of derivatives themselves.
Yeah. So I was curious about sort of just your overall thoughts around, in general, like Ethereum is making available kind of different tools and vehicles that just aren't available, I think, to like a traditional investor, right? For like in America, if you're not, say, like either through an institution or an accredited investor, you may just not have access to some of these tools, right? So I was just kind of curious about sort of your thoughts in general about like, is this sort of an exciting push towards kind of a more decentralized, more kind of everyone has access to this, and what kind of value that could bring to people's lives versus sort of a trade-off discussion around sort of the inherent risks and sort of, what maybe, if anything kind of falls within the providers to like make sure to mitigate sort of the educational risk side of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's really it's kind of an important topic. It's a difficult one because you kind of have two models, which is the educational model or the sort of nanny state protectionist model. And I think finance mostly falls into that kind of we're going to protect you from yourself model. So even though people can make a bet with one of their friends who actually is notoriously bad at paying up and will probably not pay if they win that bet, no one's going to stop them doing that. That's a bad financial risk, that's credit risk, but no one's really going to stop you. Or you can go skiing and you have to take on that risk yourself and you have to educate yourself. But when it comes to finance, we have this blind spot, which is kind of like, the government is going to tell you what you can safely do. So anything I do must be safe. And I think we need to, that mindset is a bigger problem than the risks themselves, because people assume that it's going to be safe. And so I think people who are providing this stuff do have it is necessary to communicate about risk. It is necessary to, if you're hosting the front end to Vega or another protocol, it is necessary probably to say, this is risky, make sure you know what you're doing. You could lose money if you put money in. And it's the same with losing your keys to your blockchain wallet as well. Like, people are taking this on themselves. They've got to understand and agree the risk and know that it's right for them. So I think, there are some bad actors that sell this stuff at consumers and people who are not really designed for it. I think, in our case, we're very, very focused on building software and building the protocol and giving it to the community. And at the moment, we have a reasonably educated community of people who understand technology and risk. And some of them will do crazy stuff, but you can only assume it's because they know they might lose all their money every time they put it into a DeFi protocol, and they're okay with that. By this point, if they're not, they are definitely crazy. So yeah, I think there is a need to educate people where you can, but there's also that fundamentally the technology we're building is technology that is not, we're not building platforms where we can control what people do, or we can put up a flag that says you're taking too much risk here. We're building platforms that are decentralized, and we need to try and give them the tools and education.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think I mentioned this because I think that in particular Vega is doing this, I think, the right approach. Like, like the education side of things, I think, is important. And I think, like, to your point about even when the mainnet comes out, this is the Wild West mainnet, right? It's not the throw all your money into it mainnet. Like, I think that kind of approach is in the long term is going to be the best kind, right? Because it mitigates the use risk or protocol risk or any kind of risk, really.
Absolutely. And one of the questions that I always wonder is whether or not there's some people have the dream that everyone has their own crypto wallet, and certainly I have my own crypto wallet, but I also host my own web server, and most people don't do either. And I don't. The internet's now mainstream, but most people still don't host their own web server. And I think maybe Web3 and some of the sort of future things will change that. But if they do, they'll do it by making the UX very different. I still wonder, the same with sort of DeFi and crypto, is will it be worth people's while actually paying a fee to companies that will manage that stuff and that will be insured and they'll be registered with the government and they will make your money good if they lose it all? For the average person in future, maybe DeFi will be on the back end. Maybe they'll end up just paying a company to remove the risk and the difficulty. I'm not sure. We certainly haven't fixed enough of the UX that I'm currently convinced everyone will manage their own keys. But I do think it's really important to give people that option and to make the system transparent either way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's interesting that, we actually have the opportunity to work seamlessly within both systems, right? Like, that's not an option you get in the traditional world where there is really only one access and you don't get your key, right? At least here, the ability to at least access that and and to have the optionality to be in full control and to say, I know what I'm doing, is unique, I think, to blockchain really, and is, I think, really one of the most desirable chunks of it.
Yeah, I think it's really important. It's a really fundamental kind of freedom, I guess, that people need to have.
Awesome, cool. Just a note for everybody in the chat, if you have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or drop them in the chat. Happy to have you come on. This will be my last question, at least, which is a question I ask everybody. If you weren't very busy at Vega, and you were kind of taking a look at the hackathon and maybe attending as a participant or what have you, what would you be excited to be building? What would you be thinking about? What kind of problems are you kind of mulling on that you wish you had more time to take a look at? Basically, what would you love to see?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, the boring answer is I'd probably be very attracted to a lot of the stuff that Vega's doing because, I've worked on it and care about that. But there are a lot of problems out there which I think kind of deserve attention and time. And I think, some of the interesting ones around kind of, decentralized sort of reputation and decentralized, it's kind of interesting. Like I'm not sure that, like, say things like Ampleforth are particularly the future of finance or money, but there are some interesting things they're trying to get at in terms of sort of, how money can be distributed evenly to people, how you can kind of create fair money. And I think there's some interesting sort of research and interesting work that could be done on some of those things. So that kind of reputation and sort of monetary systems that kind of understand that, I think, would be very, very interesting to me. That's probably the kind of thing I'd be working on. Probably something like that.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think, if you think decentralized finance, reputation and credit scores and all these things, play a strong role in the ability to access that type of a lot of the parts of the world, right? So I mean, it would be kind of a no-brainer, I think, and relatively underexplored area still on blockchain. Under collateralized loans, etc.
Imagine if you could build a currency where you could guarantee that every single human on the planet would get a certain amount of that currency every week or every day or every block, and no human would get it twice, and everyone would get it once. And kind of like a universal decentralized UBI. Like, I don't know how you go about making that happen, but I think it would be really, really cool.
It'd be like a universal basic income, basically.
Exactly.
Awesome. So maybe we'll just see if anybody has any last questions. Otherwise, we can wrap up. All right, maybe we'll just wrap it up here. Well, Barney, it was great to have this conversation. Thanks again for taking the time to walk through everything, and of course to spend the time with us. And a big thank you for being involved as Vega and being part of the event. Like I said at the beginning, looking forward to seeing what people create using Vega, and of course looking forward to see what people create in general. And of course, these events cannot run without the support of our sponsors. So, really, you're a big part of making this happen. So, a lot of appreciation from my side.
Thanks, Jacob, and I thank you to you guys and all of your team for the work that's gone in the organization. I think it's been a great event so far. I'm looking forward to see what we get.
Appreciate it. All right, thanks everybody for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.